Good morning. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Maybe I need to stand at the side a bit. Okay, good morning. You can tell from those few sentences I sound different from most of you. And that's because I'm from the other side of the world. I'm actually from Singapore. And now I work for Creation Ministries International. We are an international ministry and we exist in 7 countries around the world. So we have a website, creation.com. Some of you may know this. Over 40 years of research on topics like this to train the church to be able to equip their faith. So if you can't tell by now, you know that I love dinosaurs. And that's our office in Georgia. So that's me, my wife, and my daughter. I have a younger son who is not in this picture because this is a few years back. But who would like to have dinosaurs in the office? Some of you? Okay. So why talk about dinosaurs? Well, what are we going to cover today? First of all, have you ever wondered, do dinosaurs prove evolution? Does the Bible mention anything about dinosaurs? What about the fossils? What do the fossils tell us? I'm going to show you today that when you look at dinosaur fossils, they actually make a lot more sense because they become good evidence for the worldwide flood. We're going to look at artifacts to show you that these creatures did not die out 65 million years ago, that throughout the centuries, long before modern scientists discovered them, people were familiar with these creatures. They were engraving them and making figurines and things like that. Then we're going to talk about dinosaur soft tissue. Well, in this talk, when I say soft tissue, I'm not talking about soft body parts that turn into stone. I'm talking about original biomolecules, things like proteins, DNA, things like that are still in a dinosaur bone that tells you that these things are not millions of years old. But before we get to that, let me introduce my favorite movie, Jurassic Park. So Jurassic Park fans, where are you? Anyone? Okay, so here's a quiz for you. What's the name of this dinosaur? Everybody look at that and say, I know that, that's Velociraptor. Well, that's not Velociraptor. That's the cousin of Velociraptor, Deinonychus. Yeah, you say to me, no, that cannot be. I've watched this movie 1,000,000 times. That is Velociraptor. No, it's not. You see, the real Velociraptor is actually about the size of a large dog. Now, when I say large dog, you may be thinking like a wolf or something like that. But it's like just the same weight as this dog that you see over here. See, when the makers of the movie made the movie, they made Deinonychus. That's the one that we are familiar with. But Deinonychus, the name is really boring. So they made Deinonychus and they named it after the small cousin, Velociraptor. So for one whole generation, I grew up, I thought that was Velociraptor. But it's not. It was Deinonychus. Of course, in the latest movies, they just make that even bigger and they just call it raptors. But my question to you is this: why did I think that was Velociraptor? Because that was all I was ever told. But there's another side of the story, and that is what I want to share with you today. I want to show you that when you start with God's Word and use that as a worldview to look at dinosaurs, everything makes much more sense. You see, our kids, when they go to the movies, they go to schools, they turn on the TV. Do they learn about dinosaurs being evidence of creation, or do they learn about dinosaurs as millions of years? Millions of years, evolution, that's what they're taught. But maybe you say to me, I understand that, but I'm not influenced by my culture. Really? Okay, if I say the word dinosaur to you, what's the first image that comes to mind? Do you think of huge creatures? Do you think of this picture in your mind of maybe like strange looking plants and maybe on the other side maybe a volcano and something like that? Why do you have such an image in your mind? You see, whether you realize it or not, most of us are already subconsciously influenced by the culture around us. But we need to train ourselves to start with God's Word. You see, if you believe in evolution, this is what the Big Bang evolutionary story will tell you. They say 13.7 billion years ago, there was a Big Bang, right? And then from that, the Big Bang, the planets begin to form. And then you get the Earth cooling down, there was a primordial soup. So that's cosmic evolution, primordial soup. And then the first life came about. That's chemical evolution. And then from that one cell, it evolved into all other life forms that we see today. That's biological evolution. But when you start with the Bible, we see a very different picture of history. The Bible tells us that God created the world in 6 days. There was a real Adam and Eve. And when they fell into sin, they brought sin, death, and suffering into this world. And later on, during the days of Noah, there was a worldwide flood. They killed all the land creatures and birds, except for those that were on board the ark. And later on, during the Tower of Babel, God confused the languages. And then the different languages and people groups begin to spread out all over the world. The Bible tells us a very different picture of history. So why are we talking about creation and evolution and dinosaurs? If you pull back the curtains, it really boils down to this one question. What is your authority? Is it the Word of God? And if our authority is the Word of God, then let us train ourselves to start with God's Word and to use that as a worldview to look at the world around us. At Creation Ministries, we call dinosaurs missionary lizards. Why? Because we believe that these creatures that has been used to promote the idea of millions of years in evolution, when you train yourself in this area, you can use this fascinating creature as a stepping stone to share the gospel with your family, with your friends. You can make a difference. Why? Because dinosaurs fascinate everybody. So let's learn to think about dinosaurs from a biblical worldview. So here's a quiz. We love quiz, so let's choose something, all right? The T-Rex, the teeth is really sharp, 6 inches long. What was its original diet? Plant eater, meat eater, or plant and meat eater? Who says that the original diet is plants? Okay, who says meat? Okay, who says plant and meat? Remember what I say? Start from the Bible. And the Bible tells us at the beginning, before sin entered the world, all creatures were eating plants. See, creatures only began to eat one another after sin entered the world. And God only gave Noah the permission to eat meat after the flood. In Genesis chapter 1, it says this, to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. They were eating plants. They only began to eat meat after sin entered the world. Why? Because before that, there was no death. There was no disease. There was no suffering. And God saw all He had created, and He declared it to be very good. So you say to me, okay, if it is true that dinosaurs eat plants, and you say that some of them later on eat meat, how do we know that? How do we know that they begin to eat meat? Well, at the time of the flood, and that is what actually caused most of the fossils, we have evidence that some of these creatures were actually eating one another. So sometimes you can even match the shape and the size of the teeth, match the spacing, and they can even tell you which species of dinosaur made those teeth marks. Here's another one. And what you're looking at here, this is a duck-billed dinosaur, a hadrosaur. Okay, so hadrosaur is duck-billed dinosaur. And what you're looking at here is you have two of his backbones, his tailbone actually. And you have a T-Rex tooth that is stuck in between the joints of his tailbone. In fact, we know that this creature actually survived the attack because the bone actually healed around the tooth, fusing two of his bones together as one. That's suffering. But this tells you that at the time of the flood, where we get the fossils, some of these creatures had already begun to eat one another. Another way we know what dinosaurs eat is by looking at their droppings, fossilized droppings. And sometimes we find bone fragment in there. You know, many years ago when I started giving talks like this, I will be a bit mischievous. I'll take a piece of dinosaur droppings, and by the way, there's a fossil display out there. All right, in the front, I have a piece of dinosaur dung as well. You can check it out for yourself. But when I was younger, I would, take a piece of dinosaur dung, I'll pass it to my friends. I will not tell them what it is. I say, smell it, taste it, and tell me what you think it is. Don't do that to your friends. But what's interesting about dinosaur droppings is that they don't only contain bone fragments, they also contain the remnant of grass. So for example, rice, which is a type of grass, we find the remnants in dinosaur droppings. And that is an issue, a huge problem for evolutionists for many years. Why? Because according to evolutionists, that grass did not come into existence until 10 million years after dinosaurs died out. So here it says here, depicting dinosaurs munching on grass was considered by experts to be as foolish as showing prehistoric humans hunting dinosaurs with spears. And so in Creation Magazine, this is a quarterly magazine we produce, we have an article like this, Grass-Eating Dinosaurs, a time travel problem for evolution. Doesn't have to be hard. take a thing like that, a chart, go to your kids and say, hey, look, the evolutionary story doesn't make sense. So what do? Evolutionists begin to have to push the origin of grass much further back. And then they push it again, and then push it again. And within 10 years, they push back the origin of grass 3 times, doubling in age. Evolution. But the Bible tells us from the beginning of time, they were created to eat plants. In Job chapter 40, described to us a very interesting animal that Job was familiar with in his day, behemoth. And I'll talk about this later on. But I want you to notice what it described about behemoth, this huge land creature. It says, behold, behemoth, which I made as I made you. He eats grass like an ox. Exactly that's what the Bible says. Yet, if you go to some of the museums around the States, they still have signs like this that say grass did not yet exist in the time of dinosaurs. But dinosaur droppings contain grass. What else do we know? Well, we know sometimes we find dinosaur bones, but we don't just find the bones. Sometimes we find what they eat preserved in the stomach as well. And in this case, we find that this dinosaur actually ate 3 birds. See, dinosaur ate birds? Wait a minute, how can that be? I thought according to evolution, dinosaurs evolved into birds. But yet dinosaurs were eating birds. And so it says here that the recent discoveries of the contents of dinosaur stomach pose a gut-wrenching challenge to the idea that dinosaurs gave rise to birds, because it now turns out that dinosaurs ate them. So dinosaurs were eating grass, they were eating birds. What else were they eating? They were eating mammals. Here's another one. Look at that, in the stomach. And this is what the creature would look like, eating small dinosaurs like this. So a couple of years ago, I went back to Singapore, and I went to the zoo, and there was a dinosaur exhibition. And don't ask me why there was a dinosaur exhibition. I didn't see any living dinosaurs there. But they had a sign, and this sign said this: dinosaurs didn't walk alone. They live alongside birds and mammals, like this creature that you see here. So this raccoon-looking mammal measured about 1 meter in length and hunted smaller dinosaurs, such as the Psittacosaurus. This is interesting, because just last year, they found another fossil, and again it's this same mammal eating this dinosaur. But in this case, this dinosaur was a full-grown one. It was 3 times the size of this mammal that you see here. This was in July, just last year. So here you can see this here. These 2 dinosaurs that were actually buried together, rapidly buried in a fighting pose. So here, there's a mammal. You see his arm, zoom into that. He's holding the jaw of the dinosaur, and his leg is intertwined here. They are fighting. And his jaw is in the side, is biting the dinosaur. And as they're attacking it, as they were fighting, something happened so quickly that they're forever buried in that fighting pose. And this is an artist's impression. That's rapid barrier, not millions of years. Dinosaurs eating birds, dinosaurs eating mammals. And we know from the fossil record that birds ate mammals as well. Yet when was the last time you have been to a museum and you've seen dinosaurs, birds, and mammals all in the same display? Why don't they do that? See, this doesn't fit the image that people have in their mind of an age of dinosaurs. They were all there. But earlier on, I mentioned something. I said that the most of the fossils that we see today are a result of the worldwide flood. Why do I say that? Well, is there evidence that the fossils are really the result of a flood? Think about this. How do you get a fossil forming? Well, this is what a textbook would tell you. A dinosaur dies, he sinks to the bottom of the ocean, and over millions of years is slowly being buried. And that's all the rock layers that you see there. And one day, due to erosion, the bones are exposed. Really? When was the last time you have seen fossilized roadkill? They don't last very long in the open. And how do you get fossils like this? This again, another 2 pair of fighting dinosaurs. The dinosaur on the left has bitten off the arm of the dinosaur on the right. The one on the right is a velociraptor. And the velociraptor has its claw in the neck of the dinosaur on the left. And they're fighting, and something happens so quickly, they're forever stuck in that fighting pose. Again, you see rapid barrier, exactly like what we'll expect to see if there is a worldwide flood. If there's a flood, we will expect to see fossils of dead things buried all over the world in rapid burial. So if you're a dinosaur geek like me, you know I love dinosaurs. One of the best places to find dinosaur fossils is in what we call dinosaur bone beds. Anyone heard of that? So what are dinosaur bone beds? These are places, massive places, where you have tens and thousands of dinosaurs. The bones are all mixed together, all jumbled up in one huge pile, and they're mixed together with marine fossils like clams and fish and things like that. In Canada alone, there are more than 24 such bone beds. Some of these bone beds, they're massive. They're kind of slightly aligned in one direction as if they are in flowing water. They go align in one direction for 1 square mile, and then they change another square mile in another direction. How do you get something like that? Surely all these dinosaurs did not say, hey, let's all die together in one corner. Right? And why would their fossils be mixed with marine fossils like clams and fish? But if there's a worldwide flood, there will be water sorting action, bringing these carcasses from huge areas, then burying them in one huge pile rapidly before they can decay well, in huge piles like that all over the world. And that's exactly how we see these things. So the next time you look at the dinosaur bone bed, that should tell you that's evidence of a worldwide flood. I'm going to show you a few pictures now, and I want you to notice, see if you can tell me what they all share in common. These are all dinosaur fossils. Do you notice something? What about this? Their heads are all bent backwards in a very strange position. The heads and tails are bent opposite direction. Why? No creature sleeps like this. But a lot of these dinosaurs that have a long neck, if we find the bones and they're intact, they're often found like that. In fact, this is so well known. They call this the death pose or the opistotonic pose. So how do we get something like that? Well, a couple of years ago, a researcher, Alicia Cutler, she did this. She knows that chickens have a long neck too, and chickens have a ligament that runs down the back of the neck, just like dinosaurs. Because dinosaurs have a long neck, they need a ligament to pull back the neck. And so what she did, she took freshly killed chickens and she threw them in cold water before they can harden, right? Threw them in cold water. And within seconds, the ligament contract and all the heads bent back and took on the same pose. Then she took big birds like emus. She did the same thing happened. But the moment she cut the ligament at the back of the neck, it no longer bent backwards. So we know what's the cause. It's the ligament contracting in water. And she says this, although the roads to the opistotonic death pose are many, immersion in water is the simplest explanation. Dinosaur bone beds, evidence of a worldwide flood. The necks are bent backwards because at the time of death, they were in water. What about armored dinosaurs? How do we find their fossils? So these are the dinosaurs, the long necks, but armored dinosaurs, they're the opposite. They're kind of like that, right? They're almost like no neck. So how do we find their fossils? Well, in 2017, National Geographic found the best preserved armored dinosaur of its kind. That's the Nodosaur. This is so well preserved, it was preserved in three-dimensional shape, so we know exactly how it looks like. The body armor was there. It was partially mineralized, meaning it did not turn to stone completely. Three-dimensional preservation, remnants of its last meal, patches of skin, reddish pigment, and dinosaur armor. And the scientists say that this huge creature, which they estimate to be about 3,000 pounds, was swept away in a flood and buried upside down in an undersea burial. Upside down. Why would it be upside down? When I saw this, I got really excited because this was in June. And I remember in May, I read another scientific paper. Again, the best preserved armored dinosaur of its kind. So that was in May. And this time around, it's Ankylosaurus. So this is the one that has a club at the end of its tail. And again, they talk about three-dimensional preservation, abundant soft tissue preservation across the skeleton, bony skin armor, skin impression, keratin. That's protein. You notice what they say. Again, the skeleton was buried upside down. So May, one upside down, June, one upside down. I got really excited. And I wasn't the only one because I knew something was going on. But September, another group of circular scientists published another paper. So they begin to look at all these armored dinosaurs that they find in Canada. And they find that 70% of all of them are actually found upside down. So they did computer modeling. Look at the balance. See, these armored dinosaurs, they have a heavy armor. So they realized that when you place these creatures in water, they become really unstable. Right? All you need is for a small wave to come along, and the whole thing goes total up. And so the paper, they say this: we use computer modeling to show that Ankylosaurus likely flipped over while suspended in water. You see where I'm going with that? When you start with the worldwide flood, start with the Bible. You have the correct worldview to make sense of all these things that we see today. Dinosaur fossils testify to what God has done in the past. But does the Bible say anything about dinosaurs? Well, the Bible says that God created all land creatures on the sixth day. A dinosaur is a land creature. The Bible also tells us He created man on the sixth day. That means that according to the Bible, man and dinosaur once lived together. If the fall did not happen, something like that could have been very possible. But is the word dinosaur in the Bible itself? No. Why not? Well, the word dinosaur is actually a very new word. It was coined in 1841 by Sir Richard Owen. But when was the Bible, when was it translated from Greek and Hebrew into English? It turns out that was hundreds of years before that. So of course we don't find the word dinosaur in the Bible, because the word dinosaur was not coined until 1841. But the Bible does describe a creature in Job chapter 40. And here is a creature that Job is familiar with in his day. The largest land creature that God created. I want you to look at how it is translated. They leave the name there, Behemoth, beast of beasts. Look at Behemoth, which I made along with you, and which feeds on grass like an ox. What strength is in his loin? What power in the muscle of his belly? His tail moves like a cedar. His sinews and thighs are close knit. His bones are like tubes of bronze. His limbs like rods of iron. He ranked first among the works of God. The largest land creature that God created has a tail like a cedar. What's a cedar? A tree. The cedar trees were so big that they were used to build the pillars in King Solomon's palace. You know, some Bible commentators, they put a footnote. They say Behemoth, maybe it's a hippopotamus. Maybe it's an elephant. Let's give that a try. So you have the tail the size of a cedar tree. Does that match? What about this? See, there's only one animal that fits this description. One of the long-necked cephalopods dinosaurs. And if you don't believe me, the next time you're at the zoo, take a few pictures for yourself. Is that a cedar tree? What about that? The tiny little flap there. Right? There's only one animal that fits the description perfectly. But that raises another question. If Job was familiar with Behemoth, when was Job written? Before the flood or after the flood? After the flood. How do we know? Well, because there are a few passages in Job that talk about how God had judged the wicked with a worldwide flood. And remember the 4 friends of Job? The Bible tells us which tribes they come from. They're all tribes that come after Abraham. So he's after the flood. So if dinosaurs were there on earth after the flood, during Job's day, that means dinosaurs had to survive the flood. That means that dinosaurs had to be on the ark. Do you see how changing your starting worldview changes the way you look at some of these things? So how then do you explain that? If those are really dinosaurs, how do we know that? Here's another question. If these creatures were there after the flood and they only went extinct in more recent years, do we have any evidence that people were familiar with them? Well, I want you to take a look at this. So remember, dinosaurs are land creatures. These are not land creatures. These are the marine reptiles that swim in the ocean. And before they discovered dinosaurs in 1841, they were already familiar with these marine creatures. So the ichthyosaur and the plesiosaur. What do you think they used to call this in the paleontology textbooks a few hundred years ago? They call them the Great Sea Dragons. And we know that all around the world, we have legends of dragons. Could the dragons of the past just be dinosaurs? Well, let's look at how they depict the dinosaurs. Let's go to China. So here you're looking at a bronze basin from the 3rd century BC in China. And what's on the handle? Let's turn to the side and zoom it in. You see that? What's that? Looks like one of the Camarasaurus-like creature. So I actually have this book in my office in Georgia. That's where I'm based in Georgia. And this book is actually written in Chinese. And the word that is written in there in Chinese calls this creature a dragon. Long is dragon. In Chinese, long is dragon, and dinosaur is Kong Long, which means terrifying dragon. So you have long, dragon, and Kong Long. You see the relationship there? So they call this a dragon. But when this book got brought to the West and got translated into English, the word dragon, they didn't retain it. Do you know what they changed that? In the English translation, they call that a long-necked feline. A long-necked cat. What is a long-necked cat? So why do you think that they deliberately changed the translation from dragon into a long-necked cat? You see, if they leave it as dragon, it becomes very obvious to everybody what it's meant to depict. But let's leave China, all right? So this is in China. Let's go to Cambodia. In Cambodia, we have the world's biggest temple complex, the Angkor Wat Temple Complex. It's a World Heritage Site. We know it's real. And one of the temples that was there is the Thap Prom Temple that was built in the 1100s. And on this pillar, you have all kinds of engravings. Water buffaloes, monkeys, swan, humans. And you have that in the center. What's that? Stegosaurus-like creature. In fact, I know somebody who went there, he took a cast of it, he went back and made an imprint. And this cast is actually on the fossil display that you see out on the table there. How do you get something forming like that? Look at that. So skeptics, they come along, they say, no, that cannot be Stegosaurus. That must be maybe a chameleon or maybe a rhinoceros. Really? But it turns out that this is not the only one that is found in the area. Because in the same temple, there's another very badly faded one. Look at that. And this time around, you see, he has a very tapered head, like what you see here. These creatures were roaming around when Angkor Wat, the temple was built. So maybe it's just Asia, right? So let's leave China, let's leave Cambodia. Let's go to Europe. Mona Lisa. Who painted Mona Lisa? Leonardo da Vinci. Well, about 10 to 15 years after he painted that, he had another famous drawing. And he calls that the cat, lion, and the dragon. This is part of the UK Royal Collection Trust, so we know it's real. And here you have cats in all kinds of poses. They have a few lions there. They're trying to show how flexible these creatures are. And in the center, you have a dragon. Let's zoom into that. Look at the dragon. Really resembles some of the dinosaurs that we know today. Here's another one. Here's in the UK. In Carlisle Cathedral in the UK. If you go in the 1400s, almost the 15th century there, here you have Bishop Bell, who was the minister of the church. And in those days, when you're minister of the church and you die, they bury you under the floor of the choir. So you go to the church, you lift up the carpet, and you see his tombstone there. And do you see the metal strip? The metal strip, we have animal engravings. So we have things like eels, dog, fish, the bird here. And what's that in the center? Two long-necked dinosaurs together. And what's interesting is the dinosaur on the left is different from the one on the right. The one on the left is a long-necked dinosaur, but it has a tail with 4 backward pointing spikes. There's only one long-necked dinosaur with 4 backward pointing spikes. It's a Shinosaurus. We can identify the species just from the engraving itself. What's interesting is this. Shinosaurus is never found in the UK. The bones are found in China. Remember Stegosaurus? Stegosaurus is not found in Cambodia. And for the first few hundred years, even for the first few decades when they found Stegosaurus, the vertical plates on the back, they used to think it was flat like an armored piece. So even back then, they were reconstructing these creatures wrongly. But all the way back in the 1100s, they were actually building, engraving creatures exactly like what we know of dinosaurs today. Why? Why would they be different places? Because these are post-flood civilizations. They represent where these creatures lived after the flood. The fossils represent where these creatures lived before the flood. Exactly what we expect to see. And so we say here, if the evolutionary stories of dinosaur is true, then these creatures should have died out millions of years before human beings walked the earth. How could their images be engraved on a 500-year-old tomb in northern England? Like this cartoon say, if people weren't around when dinosaurs were there, then who drew their pictures? So you say to me, okay, if that is true, how then do you explain the fossils? Don't fossils take millions of years? Don't they show that they are formed over millions of years? Well, not really. In 2005, an evolutionist, Dr. Mary Schweitzer, she found a T-Rex bone. And this bone, of course, is really big. So they had to bring it by helicopter back to a lab to break it open because it was so big. And guess what she found in there? She found red blood cells. As they begin to look at this more, they find it's not just in T-Rex, because they find it in dark-billed dinosaur, Triceratops, T-Rex, multiple cases of red blood cells in there. And then what she did in the lab, she dissolved away the mineral. And what was left, she described it as flexible, resilient. When stretched, returned to its original shape. I mean, look at that. That's dinosaur soft tissue here. Looks like beef jerky, doesn't it? And what's at the bottom right? That's the red blood cells there. Remember, she's an evolutionist, so she said this. It was exactly like looking at a slice of modern bone. But of course, I couldn't believe it. I said to the lab technician, the bones, after all, are 65 million years old. How could blood cells survive that long? Well, Dr. Schweitzer, could it just be that maybe the bones are not 65 million years old? And as scientists begin to look at more dinosaur bones, they begin to find bone cells. These are osteocytes, bone cells. And wait a minute, what's that in the center? That's the nucleus. And it's red, it's green, because that's dinosaur DNA. There's a positive test for dinosaur DNA, a DAPI stain test. Look at that. Skeptics online, they say, oh, that must be contamination. No, it's not, because the DNA is only found in the nucleus and nowhere else. How can these things be millions of years old? Mary Schweitzer says this, as the fossils dissolved, transparent vessels were left behind. It was totally shocking. I didn't believe it until we have done it 17 times. 17 times? Who does an experiment 17 times? That's a waste of money. So why do you think she did that? Because she cannot believe what she's seeing before her very eyes. Because she believed in the idea of millions of years. She said, after we had the data, I didn't publish for over a year. I was terrified. When was the last time you see a scientist being afraid to publish her results? They want to publish because that's where they get their research funds. In another interview, she described how if she published this, her fellow evolutionists would attack her. She talked about how when they found out about this, her research funds, she was cut. She had no more research funds. And later on, she was able to secure enough funding to carry on her research for another 1.5 years from an anonymous donor. Of course, later on, she was able to secure more funds. But why were her fellow evolutionists so upset with her? I think we know the answer. This is Mary Schweitzer on 60 Minutes. Let's see if you can hear what she says.
And it was elastic, like living tissue.
This is the piece.
No. She showed us video she took under the microscope.
That's really what happened?
Yes.
That's the dinosaur bone?
Without mineral now. That's what was left.
It looked like the soft tissue she would have expected to find if it had been modern bone. This was impossible. This bone was 68 million years old.
So you see this and you think, what? You say,
I didn't want to tell anybody.
You'd be ridiculed,
Yes.
right?
And so I said to my technician, okay, do it again. I don't believe it.
And yet, in sample after sample, they were there. Things that looked suspiciously like flexible, transparent blood vessels. She finally mustered the courage to tell Jack.
She said she dissolved the bone away and there were blood vessels. And, I was like shocked. I mean,
How could that be?
How could that be? That's right.
The things Mary was finding inside dinosaur bones,
Look at that.
blood vessels, and even what seemed to be intact cells, pose a radical challenge to the existing rules of science, that organic material can't possibly survive even 1 million years, let alone 68 million.
Do you hear the irony in the last sentence? So science tells us these things cannot last for millions of years. But do they ever doubt the millions of years? No. Why? Scientists begin to find protein, collagen, and even delicate proteins like elastin and laminin in what they claim was the dinosaur bone that according to them was 80 million years old. Another group of scientists found collagen in a bone that according to them was 195 million years old. The issue with that is that we can actually do tests in the lab to know how long these things take to break down. And we know that the maximum theoretical limit, so you can freeze it down, you slow down the decay, but the laws of thermodynamics still go on. The chemical bonds still break down over time. And the maximum theoretical limit is the 300,000 to 900,000 years, and all the collagen would be gone. All the protein would be gone. Dinosaurs didn't live in such cold conditions. They live in climates like ours. In 15,000 years, all the collagen would be gone. Keep in mind, this I think is the evolutionist number. I think this is too generous. But I'm using these numbers because this is what the evolutionists themselves are publishing about the decay rate of collagen. Mary Schweitzer says this, when you think about it, the laws of chemistry and biology and everything else that we know say it should be gone. It should be degraded completely. No skeptics come along, say, you Christians, you cannot explain the science, so you say God must have done it. You have a God of the gaps. You ever heard of that? How do you respond to this? Point this out to them. This is an evolutionist evolution of the gaps. Because everything that we can measure in the lab tells us that these things cannot even last for 1 million years, let alone 68 million years old. So evolutionists on the left side, over the years, they tried to come up with all kinds of explanation for how they can slow down the decay rate. That's here. Promoted where they are published. And on the right side, every single one of those explanations are refuted in the scientific literature itself. They don't have an explanation. So this is in just 2 years ago. He explains to us how they will explain soft tissue. Although many analytical techniques have shown that organic material can be preserved in fossils for millions of years, how do they know it? Well, because it's there in the dinosaur fossil, right? So we know it has to be billions of years. You see a circular reasoning there? The second half of this sentence gives us the explanation. What's the mechanism? The geochemical factors that allow this preservation are not well understood. They have no clue. And even if somehow you can freeze it down, you can do everything, background radiation itself will destroy all biomolecules in less than 1 million years. So here you have a chemist. He says even if the T-Rex had died in a colder, drier climate than Hell's Creek, environmental radiation would have degraded its body. Bones absorb uranium and thorium like crazy. You got an internal dose that will wipe out biomolecules. Mary Schweitzer says this, I just got goosebumps because everybody knows that these things don't last for 65 million years old. Science tells us these things do not last for 65 million years. If you still want to believe that dinosaur bones are 65 million years old, I have news for you. You're being unscientific. Good science supports the Bible. So if you look at all the scientific literature, top journals like Nature, PLOS ONE, and things like that, how many examples of dinosaur soft tissue do we see? Original biomolecules. How many scientific papers do we have that have documented such things? 56 documented cases. And if you look at not just dinosaurs, but you look at things like extinct marine birds and reptiles, fossilized bacterial layers, we go up to 123 cases of ancient biomaterials. I maintain a database with Dr. Brian Thomas. He's from the Institute of Creation Research. Brian Thomas, he got his PhD looking at ancient collagen. You can get a PhD in this area. It's well-established science. And so we maintain this database that record all these documented cases. Every few months, we have to update that because they keep finding new stuff that, according to them, shouldn't be there. So using the evolutionary dates, which I do not believe is true, how old do you think the oldest sample of biomolecules? How old do you think it is? According to them, 2.5 billion years. And they're still finding original protein in there. Huge problem. But friends, if the world is only 6,000 years old, if there was a worldwide flood about 4,300 years ago, and the flood caused most of the fossils that we see today, then this is not a surprise. This is exactly what we would expect to see. So that raises a question. Dinosaur soft tissue, which history does it fit best with? The Bible or the millions of years and evolution? Mary Schweitzer admits this. She says, so that leaves us with two alternatives for interpretation. Either the dinosaurs aren't as old as we think they are, or maybe we don't know exactly how these things get preserved. We have already shown you that science tells us that these things cannot be preserved for even 1 million years, let alone 68 million years. So what's the other alternative? Dinosaurs aren't as old as evolutionists claim that they are. We can actually carbon date bones. I talked about Brian Thomas, he carbon date dinosaur bones. People have this idea that carbon dating gives you the idea of billions of years. Millions of years. No, it doesn't. Carbon dating is a method to date things that are young. To get the millions of years, evolutionists have to use other methods like potassium, argon, and those things. I will cover some of that briefly in the next talk. But carbon dating is a friend of the creationists because it breaks down so quickly. If any fossil is more than 100,000 years, all the carbon-14 would be gone. But guess what? When they carbon date dinosaur bones, what do we find in dinosaur bones? They all contain carbon-14. They are all young. We carbon date coal, we carbon date oil, we can carbon date diamonds. Diamonds are pure carbon. And in diamonds, the bonds are so tight because they're so hard that there cannot be any contamination. They contain carbon-14. They are young. And earlier on, I mentioned dinosaur DNA. To date, we have at least 3 papers that talk about dinosaur DNA in the fossil record. We know from science, evolutionary numbers, too generous. They say that even if you can freeze it down to freezing condition, DNA will still break down in 6.8 million years, and then it will be all gone. 6.8 million years? That's not even 1/10 of when they say dinosaurs died out. 3 separate papers to date talking about dinosaurs' DNA in the circular literature. And if dinosaurs live in climates like ours, in 22,000 years, it should be all gone. So that's why we call DNA at Creation Ministries. DNA stands for Dinos Not Asian. So the discovery of original protein, DNA, and radiocarbon in dinosaur bones is a huge problem for evolution and the idea of millions of years. So I would like to end off this talk here today. And I covered a lot of things, but we can summarize that in 4 main points: B, C, D, and E. So B stands for Bible. We show that the Bible talks about dinosaurs. Job chapter 40, behemoth, and things like that. It tells us what dinosaurs eat. Then we look at centuries of dinosaur artifacts to show that dinosaurs once lived together with men, and they only went extinct in more recent years. Then we look at dinosaur fossils, the way we find them, right? The things that they eat. They're eating birds, they're eating mammals, the bone beds, the necks bent backwards, the armored dinosaurs upside down. They all tell us at the time of death, they were all in water, a worldwide flood. And then finally, we saw evidence of a young Earth, original biomaterial in dinosaur bones, soft tissue, DNA, and even radiocarbon. Friends, the Earth is young, and the Bible can be trusted. Do you see why we call dinosaurs missionary lizards? If you train yourself in this area, you can use this as a stepping stone to engage your family and friends in this topic. Show them that, hey, God's word is the key to understanding these things. See, many people, they have never heard of this, and that's where you can make a difference. But there's another group of people here who have heard all these things, and they choose to harden their hearts, and they choose not to believe. Why? Well, here's one atheistic philosopher, and yes, he says this: I want atheism to be true, and I am made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers. It isn't just that I don't believe in God and naturally hope I'm right in my belief. It's that I hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. Why? Because if there's a God, He's our creator. He tells us what is right and wrong. One day we're going to stand before God to give an account for our life. There are consequences to ideas. But if we're just a product of evolution, then hey, who are you to tell me what is right and wrong? I decide my own right and wrong for myself. But you can choose to be like this guy. You cover your eyes and say, I choose not to see. that doesn't change a thing. Because one day we'll stand before God and we have to give an account for our life. And if you're like this guy here, then one of the most important things you can do is to get your life right before the Lord. Romans chapter 1 verse 20 tells us this. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. So if you're coming today, please check out the fossil display we have at the back. You can come to me to ask questions. I'll be there interacting with some of you as well. But the first thing, you notice you have lots of books. I always tell people the first resource you consider is Creation Magazine. The family magazine, there's no advertising in there. And this is really designed to be able to equip you to defend your faith and to equip your family to use this as a stepping stone to reach those around you. I'll talk more about this in the next session. But that's something, we normally have a dinosaur article in almost every creation issue that we produce. Another one you might be interested in is this red color book here. It's called the Creation Answers book. Top 60 questions that people have about creation and evolution. One whole chapter, chapter 19, about dinosaurs in there. If you have kids who are in elementary school, middle elementary and above, this is a book I recommend. There's hands-on activities. A lot of the cartoons and slides that you see are from this book that you see here. And if you like this talk, this is a talk on DVD, similar to the talk that you hear today, that talks about these very same things that you hear today. Take it, go to your friends and say, hey, look, use that as a way to share the gospel with them. And of course, don't forget our website. We all love free stuff. And we have more than 10,000 articles on creation and evolution just on our website alone. So don't forget this resource as well. So friends, I would like to end off this talk here, but I'd like to end off my talk with a Bible verse. So now we learn all these things about dinosaurs. What should that do? Dinosaurs have been used to promote the idea for millions of years. But may I encourage you to start with the Word of God and then look at dinosaurs. And we should have a very different response. Now at the end of Job, after God confronted Job with all his creation, look at Behemoth, look at this dinosaur and this and that. What was Job's response? Job humbled himself. He repented. Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. When God confronted Job with his creation, with dinosaurs, Job turned around and he glorified God. And that should be our attitude. The next time you think of dinosaurs, don't think of strange creature, volcano in the background, and strange looking plants in the background. No, that should tell you, hey, remind you of what God did in the past, a worldwide flood, and how Jesus Christ would one day come back to judge the world. Thank you.